G'day guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Now today I've got a little bit of a different one for you guys. I will be taking a look at Gold Coast list and playing around with it, managing it, basically doing what I think Dimma will do now. Obviously today's been announced as the next coach of Gold Coast for 6 years. Minimum. Well, at least that's what he's contracted for. So, some exciting stuff and some exciting times ahead for the Gold Coast Suns. I personally think that they will have some success in the next coming years. You look at their list and what Dimma could add to it, both during the trade period and draft this season and maybe even next season as well. They could be making top 8 by, let's say, 2025, 2026. And if not, then they probably are cursed. And the Gold Coast Suns is probably going to live on forever because they've got a really, really good list. So let's start off. Obviously, they're not going to make the finals this year as they currently sit in 14th. And today, Dimma is going to be, it's announced that he will be coached next year. And I think the first thing Dimma does is go up to Dustin Martin and ask, hey, do you want to come play for Gold Coast next year? Or do you want to maybe leave? Victoria Dusty's been rumoured to leave Victoria for the last couple of years to GWS, I think, in 2021, Sydney last year. And to be honest, out of all the times he's been rumoured to go, I can actually see this one happening the most. I still think it's unlikely that he will leave Richmond, but I can see it happening, and especially if Richmond don't get their senior coach announced or sorted before the trade period. I think they will, but if they don't get it sorted in the next month, then I think Dusty could possibly leave the club. Now, obviously, let's talk about their list next. They've got a great list at the moment. I think Dimma even mentioned this today in his press conference. It's 80% there. It's not quite there, but it's definitely developing. Their defence, they've got heaps of fringe, small defenders that can play around with it, and they've got some decent kicks there. A few of them are very injury-prone, which isn't obviously ideal, but the more exciting thing is their key defenders in Charlie Ballard, who's All-Australian this year. Sam Collins is in ripping form, and Mac Andrew is one of the best young talents I've seen, especially key defenders, in quite a while, and he's had a really good season, especially in the last month or so. So that area of the ground is definitely sorted. Obviously, you've got Jared Witts as your ruckman. Obviously, they will go after a ruckman in their future, so that's really that sorted. So that I guess they don't really have to worry about that. Their midfield needs a little bit more, and I'll be speaking about that a little bit more in a moment when I get to the trade side of things. Their forward line is definitely their most interesting thing. They've got so many tall forwards. There's 3 or 4 of them that play in the VFL that are leading, like the Coleman for VFL. There's 3 obviously playing in their senior side, and Ben King, Levi Casbolt, and Jack Lukosius. All that will probably be there next year. Levi Casbolt will retire at the end of next year, you would think, which will probably now allow Mabior Chol to play there. I don't know. It depends what Dimma wants to do. If he plays the 2 key forwards or the 3, they have heaps of key forwards. Like, just to name a few other ones, they've got Brodie McLaughlin, who's had a really good season in the VFL. They've also got Sam Day, who hasn't played he's played a few games, I think, this year, but he's not in their best 22. Chris Burgess is actually leading the VFL for goals, and I think he won it last year, so he's one that's probably going to attract rival interest in the trade period. So there's another one that they have to, make a call on. And, they've just got so many great key forwards. Their small forwards are fine. They're not great. Obviously, losing rank can definitely hurt them. but it's still pretty good, their small forward line. Obviously, Ben Ainsworth is their leader of their small forward line. Then they've got, other guys that have been there for a while, like Nick Holman and Bailey Humphries looked really, really good this year. He's another one that I can see doing really, really well under Dimma. Elijah Hollands can play a bit forward, so there's another one. Malcolm Roses Jr.'s had some really good games in his career so far. And then you got Hugo Pauoya, who's been pretty exciting, and should be a pretty exciting talent for the future for the Suns as well. So, you got quite a lot of players there that will, probably being Gold Coast best 22. And look, to be honest, they don't really have to attack the draft that hard. Now, obviously they are, and I'll speak about that soon, but they don't really need to. And if they are, it would be around getting some maybe depth and youth. But their youth is still pretty good. So, yeah. The other thing I want to speak about is possible players that will leave the club due to, retirement or delistings and trades. So, yeah, we'll get started. With players who I think will get delisted, I think they will have to make some harsh calls on their key forwards. Sandy Brock is a key defender that hasn't been able to get in and is about 5th or 6th in line in their key defender stocks. So I see him getting delisted at the end of the year. There is a few other ones that I could throw in there. Ned Moyle could get delisted. He's a ruckman that's on the fringe. Another one could be someone like a Body Erland. They've got so many small defenders. He could get delisted. I think they might make a harsh call and move on to Sam Day, or maybe he retires because he's just taking up basically a spot on their list that shouldn't really be taken up, really. I also see, there's a few players that could leave the club, but I can also see Dimma maybe taking a bit of a punt and possibly even delisting a few of the older players. And they got 2 old players, Jed Anderson and Connor Blakey last year, from the SSP draft, which is the supplemental selection draft. They'll probably get delisted as well. He could maybe even decide to delist Levi Casbold if he really feels like it. But yeah, that's about it for delistings. For players that I think will leave via trade, Ned Moyle is another one that could get picked up by a club, possibly Collingwood, with a trade. I can see Elijah Hollands, maybe not this year, but maybe next year, getting traded or requesting a trade at minimum. Jeremy Sharp was rumoured to leave last year. It almost looks certain that he'll be leaving at the end of this season. I don't think he's played a game this year. Been playing in their reserves all year. Braden Fiorini is another one that wanted to move last year but couldn't. He could be going at the end of the year. And then the big controversial one is Sam Flanders, who's been ridiculous in the last 5-6 weeks. Probably their best player, arguably. Whether he wants to go or not is up to him. I personally see him staying, but it's another one where he could make the decision to go. Now, the next one is trades. Obviously, they've got to try and get Dusty. I feel like they can maybe get him. Obviously, it's unlikely, but there's still a chance that they can get him. Another one that I have, and this is just for wing depth, with possible, trades of Fiorini and Sharp. That wing is sort of up for grabs. You feel like Brandon Ellis, who used to play for Dimma, will probably get one of the wings. You feel like the other one will be open. And I feel like James Jordan could be a possible option from Melbourne that could play on the other wing. Alice has got defensive depth and Jordan can go forward and kick some goals. Technically a premiership player for Melbourne. And looks pretty comfortable at AFL level. Just can't seem to crack in for the best 22 that often for the D's. I think he's perfect for Gold Coast. The other one is Matt Crouch. That's the big one. Obviously, at the start of the year, was said that he wasn't going to be offered a contract by Adelaide for next year. He's been playing pretty well. Cracked into the AFL side a month ago, and he's been playing pretty well. So it looks like he could maybe stay. But he is another one that they could pick up, and I think should pick up. And finally, I have one player that I think Dimma should make a pretty big decision about, to try and maybe do what they've been doing the last couple of years and offload salary, and also try and get another good draft pick. And that's Alex Sexton. Now, he's been good when he plays in the AFL. It's just Stewie Dew and even Stephen King now just being a little bit harsh on him and dropping him and leaving him out of the side. And he's got potential, I mean, obviously his years are starting to fade, but he's still 29. He's still a pretty good forward, and has been for so long for Gold Coast. So that is one I see Dimma possibly making a hard decision and like putting him up for a trade to try and get a draft pick. And I'll speak about the draft soon as well. But if Gold Coast can get Dusty, Matt Crouch, Jordan, and get rid of Sexton, get another draft pick, and get all the draft picks that they're expected to get, then Jesus Christ, Gold Coast will be a good team next year, you feel. Also getting depth into some of the players as well definitely helps, that's for sure. Now the draft is definitely the big point for the Suns. Obviously, Jed Walter is the first player they'll be speaking about. He is probably the biggest player apart from Harley Reid in this draft. And is one that Gold Coast should definitely be going after, and they've probably going to match the bid for him. I don't really see North or West Coast really landing him or trying that much to get him. So I do think they will be able to get Jed Walter. He's a pretty good player. He's pretty underrated as well. I personally think he could be better than Harley Reid. You never know. He's about the 195 centimetre type player. Fairly tall. So, he could really play anywhere they really want him to. I think he is a midfielder though. Mid-forward, I think. So, fits the Dusty role fairly well if they end up not getting Dusty. So, that he's certainly the player that Gold Coast would be going after. That's for sure. He's definitely the one you feel that could possibly get into the 22. Give him depth and youth and experience. It would definitely help him out, that's for sure. The other one is definitely Ethan Reid. He seems to go fairly highly rated for, I think he could be the highest rated ruck in this draft as well. So that is definitely a big call. If Gold Coast probably end up selecting him, he's come through their academy. He will probably get selected by Gold Coast, you feel. So there's another player that probably has pretty good potential, and getting him games and getting taught from maybe Jared Witts a few tips and stuff, he could become a really, really good player for Gold Coast and is probably going to be their next ruck, you feel. It'll be pretty exciting to see how Gold Coast, manage him. The other one, who I believe is also a midfielder, is Jake Rogers. He's the third player to go through Gold Coast Academy, and he's probably involved in this trio now that will end up being selected by the Suns. He's a very, very small player. He's about Caleb Daniels' height, and he could be a pretty good player for him. Will definitely probably get selected by the Suns. You feel. So there's another one. Like I said before, if they get rid of Alex Sexton, they could manage to get a fairly decent other draft player, someone fairly low down the pecking order that's rated pretty highly is probably what they would be after. But they're obviously the big three that I just spoke about in this draft for the Gold Coast. All predicted to end up going there. Don't see any other club matching their bid for them. So I think that's probably what's going to occur for them. A player that I could almost see them maybe getting in this draft as a bit of a later selection, if it happens, if Alex Sexton's gets moved on, someone that I could target for their forward stocks as well, just for depth in there, is a guy called Ashton Meyer. I quite like him, quite underrated. I think it was predicted a few weeks ago by the AFL or Cal Toomey that he'd be going at pick 25. But I've got him perhaps slipping down even further, down to pick 30, and that seems about right. Alex Sexton moved on. I can see Alex Sexton playing for any other club next year except Gold Coast. So that is a big one for me. I feel if they can secure him as well, then that's 4 superb players added to potentially Dustin Martin, James Jordan, Matt Crouch. They're not going to get all of them, obviously, but if they can get 4 to 5 out of those players, obviously the 3 draft picks are probably certain. The first 3 I mentioned are probably certain, and maybe throw in, let's say, the most likely of who's going to come through the trade period in Matt Crouch, and all of a sudden that is a pretty scary looking Gold Coast Suns outfit. Hope you guys enjoyed my little prediction on Gold Coast, and hopefully we can finally see some success for the Gold Coast Suns next season.